Howdy and welcome to the Texas Clay Festival online demonstrations. My name is Melissa Mencini, as you most likely know, and I'm going to take you through all the steps of making one of my cutout bowls. I get the most questions about the cutout bowl, so I figured that was probably a really great demo for you all to see. And it's certainly one that I can't do in person at the festival because it's just a little too labor intensive and it takes me 2 to 3 days to make one. I used 4.5 pounds of clay to make the bowl in this demo. Obviously the video is way sped up. There are a couple of times where I'm going to slow it down so you guys can see exactly how I'm holding my hands, but I wanted to do this split screen so that you could see my hand placement, especially working a little bit more clay. 4.5 pounds isn't a ton, but you do definitely have to change your posture and your body mechanics in order to muscle that clay around. So here I am just throwing the pot. Because the pot has a flat bottom, you're going to see that I spend a lot of time compressing the bottom of that bowl. I really don't want S-cracks to occur. And in real time, I would say that one of these bowls, just for me to throw it, probably takes about 12 to 15 minutes. They're really quick for me to throw. They're not quick for me to do anything else to. I still do, on occasion, get air bubbles. And I don't really care about the air bubbles, especially in these cutout pots. I'll go ahead and work on getting rid of it, but I can usually just navigate my pattern over that air bubble to go ahead and cut it out. I really work that exterior with a flexible metal rib to make it super, super, super slick and get rid of all the throwing lines. I can't have any of that information on these bowls. It just doesn't really make sense. I do as much work as I can with the clay on the bowl on the wheel head. So I'm removing some excess clay on the bottom, giving it the sort of an undercut before I go ahead and cut it off and flip it over. I can't flip it over for about 24 hours. I have to wait. So here I am the next day with a bat with a bunch of concentric rings on it, flipping it over, so I'm going to go ahead and trim the bottom. When I'm trimming the bottom and cleaning up the very bottom of the pot, this is the only chance that I get to do any of that stuff. If I don't get it right, I don't get another opportunity to go ahead and flip it over. The clay at this stage is wetter than I would generally recommend somebody trimming a pot. The clay can really still be thrown right now at this point, but because I have to do so much cutting on it, I don't really have a whole lot of options. So I throw the bowls one day, I let them sit overnight under plastic, and then the next day I come in and trim them up, cover them really, really well, and usually I can cut them out in the same day. Sometimes I can't, so it starts to get a little iffy if it does push into day 3, but it is absolutely doable at day 3. Not my favorite, but doable. So after all this cleanup on the bottom, once again, I'm making it look really slick. I'm giving it a nice little undercut. This is not in real time. This is sped up a ton. But this is my last chance to access that bottom. So now I put it on a little tiny bat and I'm going to flip it over, get it all kind of nice and centered and feel that thickness, make sure it's good, and then get it on my banding wheel. And I pop my banding wheel up on a bucket so that my body is not straining. That was an MKM decorating disc. I'm sure that all of you have seen those in the clay stores. They're pretty fabulous. I put some extra marks on mine, so mine has 20 divisions. So first I centered it, and now I'm going ahead and I'm marking all of those 20 divisions on there. Those are going to be my guides for how I'm going to decorate everything. So I take my thumbnail and I just mark around the top, probably about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Same with the bottom. And those are going to be my stop-start for designs. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark vertically using a pencil and a flexible little ruler. I think that ruler is maybe 6 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all those vertical lines before I do anything else. Once again, that's 20 divisions. I don't have to use all 20, but I usually do. So now I start to take all my previous templates that I make out of old show cards, start holding them up and figuring out what's going to look good, what's going to make sense with that sense of volume on the pot and the height of the pot. All of them are a little bit different. No two are identical. So a lot of times it's me cutting out different shapes. It might be me making one that's a little bit taller or a little bit longer or a little bit wider to accommodate the volume of that pot that I threw. So at this point, I'm starting to get it kind of dialed in as to what's going to make sense and how everything's going to go. So I measure that inside bottom where I made that line to make sure that that lines up with where the floor of the pot is. And so now with this template, I'm kind of figuring it out. And I'm going to mark on the top a pencil line that's going to go along with that line that I made with my thumb on the top so that everything stays really nice and even. I trace around it with a needle tool. I usually do a few of these and I'll mark all of my markings and then make sure that there's enough space in between everything that I'm going to cut out so that the pot doesn't fall apart when I actually fire it. So here I'm just still marking around everything, planning out that bottom and the top, how everything's going to go together, and now everything is marked magically. So I take a big old brush that's got a bunch of water on it, and I'm going to go ahead and hit that interior just so that it stays kind of wet and cover everything. Oh, me with my double bifocals is how I think of those. I do wear bifocals, and then I wear cheaters on top of my bifocals. So as I'm cutting all this out, I go ahead and I cut the tops first. I cut those vertical lines. My hand is already in position, so making that same exact repetitive mark is way easier. If I were to move my hand position, then those lines would start to get really wonky really quick. So I just go through with my X-Acto, making all the cuts. And now I'm going to go ahead and I think I slow this down to real time so that you can see just how slow I am when I actually cut out the clay. I think of it as I'm like trying to use the precision of a surgeon as I cut into the clay. I don't want my hand to slip. You can see how I have the handle of my X-Acto knife covered with a bunch of masking tape. I did that to fit my hand specifically. I'm going to get rid of that bat on the bottom because I can't reach everything comfortably. Being really, really, really careful with this pot. And every single design that I do, the cuts need me to approach the clay differently so that the clay doesn't tear or rip or do anything strange. So each design, each pot, I kind of have to almost relearn how to navigate through it. To me, that's a lot of fun. It forces my brain to constantly be problem solving and constantly be active. So now this is obviously super sped up and I'm just going to run through. I maybe even trimmed out a lot of this cutting out. Those little bits that are sticking down, what I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of water and I am kind of cleaning it with a little bit of water in my finger because the clay does like to sort of tear just for whatever reason on that shape and on the way that I make those cuts. So I kind of have to just go in and clean it up a little bit. I always work from the top down. The bottom is always going to have a bit more moisture than the top. So I want to go ahead and cut all that dry stuff, or that theoretically dry stuff, first before I start dealing with the bottom. If the pot will allow, or if the shapes and design will allow, I'll keep those cutout pieces in. On this pot, on both the top and the bottom, they started to fall out. There's, I don't know, some weird weight on it, and I don't want it to accidentally grab any bits of clay and cause issues. So for this shape and for this sense of volume and for these cuts, it was easier for me to just take them out as I go. Like I said, if I can keep them in, I prefer that because it helps hold the moisture of the pot better. I also have a rule. Anybody that's ever taken class with me in the past or knows me personally in real life knows that I generally make rules for how I work. And one of my rules when I'm making these is I have to cut everything out at the same time, seated in the same place so that my hand is in the same position. It might sound kind of weird, but it keeps my knife at a better angle and my cuts more even. So if I needed to get up and use the restroom or take a drink of water or whatever, before I start dealing with the bottom is when I would have had that opportunity. So now you could see I'm dealing with the bottom kind of the same way that I deal with the top. And the pot at this point is still really fragile. It is flexible. It wants to move on me because the clay is pretty stinking wet. You could see on that cut I actually had to hold that piece in place. But once again, I did all the straight cuts on the bottom first, and then I go ahead and I do all of those kind of like arched cuts afterwards. I really wish that this is my real working time, but it is not. These bowls are certainly a labor of love. They're fun to make. They're just very labor intensive. So now I'm happy with that. All the cuts are made. At this point, I could go into day 3. I could go ahead and put this under plastic and come back the next day and clean it up. Here, I'm just checking to make sure that I didn't make it super out of round. So this is same day. Now I'm just going in and I'm cleaning up all of the corners. And here's a little bit kind of more of like, I want to say like my view of what I'm looking at and what I'm looking for. So you can see that some of those edges are not beautiful and not perfect. And I'm going to sponge everything, but it's so much easier for me to just go in with my X-Acto knife and just clean everything up. If I had a wonky cut, this is a perfect opportunity for me to fix it. If I let it get too dry, I'm not going to be able to cut it with the X-Acto. So here's a bird's eye view of me doing the exact same thing, just kind of cleaning up all those corners. Once again, this is super, super, super sped up. This is not at all real-time working. I visually scour every single cut and every single edge to make sure that they look as close to identical as my hand is capable of making. Some of these cuts look like they might be in real time, but they're not. They're really sped up. When I'm doing all this cleanup work, it is not quick. Once again, I think about it as I'm almost like doing surgery on the pot. I don't want my hand to slip. I don't want anything to happen. I only want to shave off a teeny tiny bit in order to make the pot what I want it to be. So now I'm sponging it up. Now I'm cleaning. I always clean the insides first, and this is something I could do on day 3 of the pot, very easily on day 3. But I go ahead and I sponge everything. I make sure everything looks really good. Once I'm done with the inside, then I go ahead and I sponge the outside. Obviously, once again, this is not real time. This is super sped up. There is, I think, one time where I will slow it down a little bit so you can see what cleanup looks like in real time. It is slow as can be. I occasionally post videos like this of me working on Instagram. Feel free to give me a follow. It's at Melissa Mencini. Very labor intensive. I move the pot also to the edge of the banding wheel so I can get down there. So I'm just kind of sliding it around. So also when I'm working on something like this, I have to make sure that all my tools and equipment are all super, super clean. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with weird little chunky bits on the bottom or dragging my clay, my pot across something. And like I said, I don't have the opportunity with these because they're so fragile. I don't have the opportunity to pick it up and rework the bottom. Okay, so this is the time where I am actually cleaning this in real time. This is not sped up at all. This is just how fast or how slow, however you want to view it. This is how it goes. So I'm really paying attention to those edges, making sure everything looks really good. And I'll go back over everything a couple of times. Okay, now we're sped back up. I'm sure some folks might find it relaxing to watch me clean these. It's very labor intensive and I don't think it's fun to watch. It's like watching paint dry. Ooh, I think I knocked a little chunk of clay out of there, so I just went ahead and fixed it. Also, as I'm cleaning these, I'm making sure that I get rid of all of those, like the horizontal mark that I made on the top as well as on the bottom. And all of those vertical lines that I made. This right now is sitting on a 1-gallon bucket. I do raise and lower my work to prevent body strain, so I really want you all to think about that as you're working, no matter what you're working on. This one is just about finished. And you're going to get to see what they look like in the kiln, as well as in real life, finished up and with fruit in them. Here they are in the kiln, ready to be fired. And here are a couple of examples of them with fruit in them. Thank you so much for watching, and please swing by my booth to see these in real life.